Good morning, everybody. Hopefully everybody had a good night's sleep last night and has been enjoying the conference. I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Adrian Cortes, and my colleague is Dr. Bryan Carter. Today we're going to be presenting a little bit about our research and what led to an actual workable framework that promotes new teacher reflection and new teacher learning, specifically in the realm of culture responsive teaching. So again, the agenda, we're going to talk about a little bit about the background of our project, the research that led to it. Then we're going to lead into the idea of the outcomes of the project and how this could really impact many teacher preparatory programs that are university sponsored throughout the country. And then we're going to give you a short little demonstration of the framework and how it actually is utilized or can be utilized. But before we move forward, I'd like to turn it over to Dr. Carter, who will kind of give us a background of what the foundational materials that were used as we moved forward throughout this whole process, because this has been a multi-year process in the making. And so, Dr. Carter?
Thank you. My name is Dr. Bryan Carter. I am the program director at City University of Seattle for our teacher prep program. If you've come to AACTE, you've probably seen me a couple of times. I'm the only person that tends to show up in a cowboy hat. It's a little weird, I know. It didn't start as a shtick, but it kind of has become that. My students are like, oh, do you remember Dr. Carter? He's the one with the hat. And, so this whole project started years ago, before COVID, with a conversation I had with my wife, who's going to be pressuring me in my presentation. We had partnered with Edthena since 2015 to do observations in our program. We do a combination of both in-person observations and online observations, so they get the benefit of both. In that, and then I was telling my wife about Edthena, and she had mentioned, she's a clinical social worker, and she had mentioned in the process of training as a social worker, when you work with kids, they oftentimes will film their sessions, and what they're looking for is not so much what they're saying, it's what they're not saying. What's your body language? How is the child reacting to you? What's their body language? What's your tone? What kind of word choice are you using? These little nuanced pieces that really have nothing to do with what you're saying per se, but just your presence and how you're interacting with another human being. And so that kind of sparked the idea for me on why don't we do this as teachers? You know, we film ourselves teaching, and oftentimes we're breaking it down to, you know, how was your instruction? How was your, you know, where's your presence in the classroom? Where are you standing? You know, kind of the nuts and bolts of our profession. But we don't spend a lot of time actually thinking about how we interact with our kids. Little things that can be the difference between being inclusive and exclusive. Whether it's, you know, and a lot of times when we talk about culture, and we'll get to some of the examples where this came up, some things as simple as, you know, where I grew up, I would always say, you know, yes ma'am, yes sir, because that's how I grew up. But as we started to go through this process, what happens when you do that and you start to exclude someone who doesn't identify that way? Because it's not about us. It's about our students and what we're doing to draw them in rather than push them away. And so I initially had presented this, actually I think back, it was 2019, 2020. I had done an online one for AACTE. I know everybody says AACTE, I say AACTE, so if you know, that's what I mean. And then we had presented this again in New Orleans as we had developed, and we had our first kind of sample product of students going through this reflective process and being able to demonstrate and show some raw data on some of the initial piloted versions of this process. And then it was about 21, 22 that Adrian, who had been one of my students at one point in time and was teaching out in Camas School District, and I had brought him on board to teach several classes at my campus in Southwest Washington. He kind of joined this process and then ran with it as part of his doctoral research. So I'll pass it over to Adrian for its last few renditions.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Carter. So as Dr. Carter said, when we first presented some of the foundational aspects of this research back in New Orleans for the 74th annual AACTE conference, we looked at identifying how individual programs address race, equity, and social justice. We got a lot of good feedback from that presentation. We got a lot of questions too. And as Dr. Carter said, in 2022, he basically said, hey, Adrian, there's a lot of questions here. There's a lot of things we can probably explore, a lot of branches we can go run with it with your doctoral dissertation. So I did. And I specifically zoned on not only the using online video observations and reflective, real-time peer reflective evaluation, but I wanted to take a look at how could the end result lead to a framework that could be applied in a real-time setting. So that brings us to where we are today, presenting in 2024 here at the AACTE, where we're going to be able to reveal that the results of that. So when I did my research for my doctoral dissertation, again, learning from many of the questions that were asked when we first presented this in New Orleans, some of the research goals that I looked at and that rose to the surface, I wanted to be able to understand what was the significance of the theory to practice gap that exists in pre-service new teacher candidates and their ability to learn, apply, reflect, and improve on their ability to teach and engage in culture responsive teaching pedagogy. The second goal that I wanted to look at, second research goal I wanted to look at, was how do we understand how to bridge the theory to practice gap? How can video observation and real-time peer reflective feedback, how can that bridge or close the theory to practice gap? Which ultimately led to the research question that you can see right here that says, how does using online video observation and real-time peer reflective analysis increase the overall awareness of culture responsive teaching pedagogy, specifically with pre-service teachers in a university-sponsored teacher preparatory program? Again, that led to the very long but very rich research dissertation that I had, but it ultimately led to a workable model that you'll see here today that can be used in teacher preparatory programs across the nation. This particular model is used right now within Edthena. So Edthena is a major driver in this, with this framework. So I want to talk to you a little bit about the support pillars, if you will, the load-bearing past research that I looked at when doing this, this research. While this is not the only research I looked at, because I looked at a lot of research, but I wanted to highlight two specific load-bearing pillars of research. One of them being Albert Bandura's research and the Bobo doll effect. Many of you are familiar with it, if not all of you are familiar with it. Albert Bandura was a renowned researcher, specifically in the realm of behaviorism, led to a lot of interesting findings, some controversial, some not controversial, but his findings definitely showed how modeling, observational learning, or learning by imitation can really improve overall social learning. So that was the first pillar that really rose to the top for me. The second pillar was Zaretta Hammond's culture responsive teaching. And for those of you that are aware of Zaretta Hammond and her culture responsive teaching, she puts forth a very good foundational understanding of how culture responsive teaching should look like, right? She identifies 4 pillars: awareness, information processing, learning partnerships, and community building in terms of understanding how culture responsive teaching should be delivered and how new teachers, specifically in this case of the research that we did, how new teachers can understand what culture responsive teaching looks like. So what we did is I looked at all of those 4 pillars, and I wanted to use those pillars as a foundation to build and design the research tools that we're going to be used in this specific research. So those tools included, and I'll get to it again, they included the pre and post surveys that the candidates who participated in the research did. They included the prompts, the question prompts that they used when engaging in the real-time peer reflective analysis. And so to me, it gave a good structure in which the framework could be looked at in terms of best practices of culture responsive teaching. So, for example, under the awareness pillar, new teachers, it asks, can new teachers locate and acknowledge their own socio-political position? Can new teachers sharpen and tune their cultural lens? How can new teachers learn to manage their own social emotional responses to student diversity? And so I took out one of them specifically to use as a strand, if you will, to build the pre and post survey as well as the real-time peer reflective prompts that were used in the research. And as you go forward, again, the learning partnership pillar, I took out the give feedback in emotionally intelligent ways so students are able to take it in and act on it. On the information processing, I took out 2 of the strands, specifically when it comes to orchestrating learning so it builds the student's brain power in culturally congruent ways, and then use brain-based information processing strategies common to oral cultures. And then lastly, under the community pillar, I took out the strand of setting up rituals and routines that reinforce self-directed learning and overall academic integrity. So those strands were pulled out, used to build the research tools, but the overall methodology that the research followed included, first and foremost, they were university students in a new teacher preparatory program, specifically City University students. Each student participated in all areas of the study. They provided quantitative as well as qualitative data. All the candidates had previously completed university coursework involving equity, social justice, and diversity. All the study participants completed again, like I said earlier, a self-evaluated pre and then a post survey in research group sessions. Again, the surveys were built using the 4 pillars of culture responsive teaching that Zaretta Hammond writes about. And then in group settings, the study participants watched the videos of their peers and themselves engaging in real classroom instruction. So what they would do is they would take a survey that asked questions on how they see themselves in being able to deliver culture responsive teaching. Then they would watch videos together as a cohort. As they watched each video, after each video was played, some time would be allowed for them to go through 13 prompts that asked, did they see this in the video? Did they see this in the video? And they would discuss that with their peers. And then we'd go on to the next video and so forth. After all the videos were watched within that cohort, then they took a post-survey. And the post-survey and the pre-survey had the identical questions in them. And so we were able to analyze the differences that they saw in themselves in engaging in culturally responsive teaching. Was it higher to begin with? Or was it lower to begin with, and perhaps it was higher at the end because of that real-time peer reflective analysis?
Real quick, Adrian.
Yes.
So to give you some context of the program at City University, we're a private nonprofit, so we cater largely to, we have one of the largest alt-route programs in the state. So in Washington, alt-route is a one-year licensure program for folks who already have, for example, their bachelor's degree. A lot of our candidates are paraeducators who've been in the field for a lot of years, and it's a quick way for them to get licensure. It's a very diverse program. We are about 50% non-white, and we also have a pretty large representation. We have what's called the ARE partnership, the Academy of Rising Educators with Seattle School District. This is a partnership that is largely promoting African American teachers in the Seattle area. So it is a supported program. So they go through our bachelor's program, or possibly, for some of them who have bachelor's degrees, they go through our alt-route program. But it's a pretty diverse program. It has a very diverse background. It extends its geography from Southwest Washington up to Edmonds or Everett, north of Seattle. We have our Seattle campus, Tacoma, largely west side of the state, but we do support students east of the mountains. The second thing I wanted to throw in there is part of this process, one of the most difficult things when you do equity work, and especially if you are white, if you are from the dominant culture, it's really hard to one, self-reflect, because nobody wants to call themselves out. And two, it can be difficult to hear it from your peers. I'm saying, you know, you said this, and I can see a student in the video didn't react well to it. Did you notice that? And part of this training is to teach us to become more vulnerable, to self-identify, to be able to step out and be like, you know what, you're right. I did do this, and I should probably approach it differently. Because the only way things are going to change for teachers and for that awareness is for us to learn when we make mistakes and be able to accept that, to be able to say, yeah, I didn't do that right, or I made that student uncomfortable when I didn't mean to. And that's one of the hardest parts. So going through this process helps our teachers kind of go through the program and get the nervousness away from watching themselves make mistakes. You know, most of you have used any sort of video. Students are always like, oh, I sound so funny. They get used to it after a while. Same thing. When you normalize that behavior of being able to critique whether you're being inclusive or exclusive, the type of tone and body language, all those pieces, when you normalize that, then it becomes part of professional practice. It becomes part of professional reflection. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, perfect. Yes, absolutely. And so, like I referred to earlier, the methodology that was used, this is an example of the pre and post survey questions. And as you can see, it does have the feel of the different strands that were used, built on the foundational research that Zaretta Hammond put forth. So for example, each candidate was asked, do you think you manage your own social emotional response to student diversity in the classroom well? And they would self-rate themselves. Do you think you provide feedback in emotionally intelligent ways so students are able to act on it or take it in and act on it? Again, they would self-rate themselves. Do you think you provide ways to orchestrate learning so it builds students' brain power in culturally congruent ways? Again, self-evaluate themselves. So they would go through these six self-reflective questions, and they would self-rate themselves again prior to engaging in the research, and then they would rate themselves once the research session was complete and after they watched both their videos as well as their peers' videos. And the research actually showed that there was a noticeable change in terms of no one candidate went in and basically said, I feel I'm right here with my ability to deliver culturally responsive teaching, and nothing has really changed with me engaged in this process, right? The research showed there's a strong amount of evidence that showed if they went in thinking they had a high level of ability to engage in culturally responsive teaching, once they were done, it dropped after they saw their peers, right? They're like, oh, maybe I'm not as strong in delivering culturally responsive teaching as I thought I was. And we also saw data that showed the opposite, where they thought that their ability to deliver culturally responsive teaching was very low. Once they engaged in the research and in the process and viewed the videos of themselves and their peers, then they came out and they said, actually, I think my ability to deliver culturally responsive teaching is that much higher, right? So there was never a static result. There was always a change.
Yeah, it was pretty clear and consistent that we saw through several iterations that we've tried this, and it's to be expected, right? Folks will oftentimes think either, yeah, I'm rocking at this, I got it, piece of cake, or other people are like, I really don't know this, I'm not. And in both cases, they found, for a lot of them, yeah, you knew more than you thought you did, or I think you're being a little overzealous. There's a lot still to learn. And I think that was the important component to it is that when we sit, this is that whole theory to practice gap, is what we think is going to work or what we think is going to be effective ends up being maybe not what we intended. And that's part of that process, is identifying those unintended actions, unintended behaviors to create that self-awareness. And it's the examples that will come up are things as simple as proximity or presence, or how are you calling on the boys more than the girls, or what are some of your what's your word choice? What is your body language? How are you treating disruptions in the class? Are you targeting certain kids over others? Again, this is a great opportunity, and Adrian teaches this as part of our equity class, in addition to our instruction class, is when we talk about microaggressions and things like that, or some of those unconscious biases, that's where it's going to come out. Because again, if it's unconscious, they're not thinking about it, but when they see themselves do it. My daughter, sometimes she'll do goofy things, and she was on the Ring camera in front of our house, and she was doing this goofy thing. I'm like, why were you doing that? And she's like, what do you mean? What are you talking about? And I showed her. She's like, oh, well, I didn't really even realize I was doing that. We oftentimes don't think about some of those unconscious behaviors until we see it. And that's the beauty of this, is when you see it, you really can't unsee it. And you really have to start to think about, what am I going to do to evolve and change in my practice that's going to, again, draw students in, to be inclusive and to pull them in.
Mm-hmm. So again, in terms of the data that we extracted once the research was completed, the qualitative data that was extracted definitely demonstrated that both the peer reflective analysis as well as the video observations allowed candidates to gain a meaningful amount of interaction in terms of the value that they pulled from their experience. And then the quantitative data suggested that there was a change of belief in performance levels involving culturally responsive teaching. So in summary, the findings suggested that the candidates were able to reconstruct their prior knowledge based on new impressions through both the self-reflection in their roles as new teachers. So we took this research, analyzed it, dissected it, and we said, how do we make this usable, not just in terms of the research, right? How do we make it usable for new teachers in a teacher preparatory program? So we partnered with Edthena, and we were able to use a lot of the research to create a framework, a usable framework that can be used in really the same manner that the research was structured in. And I'd like to give you a really short demo of what that would look like in Edthena.
In this video, I'm going to show you how you can tag specific comments to a framework. Here you see a video that I have already shared with my group, and I'm going to do some self-reflection with it. When users share a video, they will select what framework they would like their comments to be linked to. While watching my video, I want to stop and make a comment that will be tagged to my framework. After clicking on the plus sign, I can then choose what category I would like my comment to be associated with. I'm going to click on Note. I can then type in my comment and choose the appropriate indicator for my framework. I'm going to choose Making Authentic Connections with Students. I will then click Submit. And you can see at the bottom, my comment has already been timestamped and shows which part of the video it is connected to. This will allow for other users to see which part of the framework was mentioned in the video, and then they can click on that comment to go directly to that specific part of the video. If I wanted to go up and see the part that is talking about cultural practices and orientations to create safe spaces, I can click on this timestamp and I will be taken directly to that part of that video.
So as you can see, the video embeds all of the aspects of the research that we put together. And this is, multi-year level of research. But it is a practical way in which students can engage in real-time peer reflective analysis by utilizing this framework and utilizing video observations to improve their overall practice or help them increase their self-awareness of their ability to deliver culturally responsive teaching. And so I'll turn it over to Dr. Carter to talk about what this looks like for us moving forward and how you can participate with your own university should you choose to.
So, some examples that came up in the past. I had one student, in one of the first renditions of this, she grew up in Virginia, played college basketball, absolutely wonderful student. Again, like me, she being from Virginia, she was kind of raised with, yes sir, yes ma'am. And we watched the video, and somebody had said, well, what if you have a student who's non-binary? Does that become exclusionary? And she goes, I really never thought of that. And it became something, it wasn't triggering for her, what didn't offend her, she realized, you're right. I have to recognize my culture and where I'm coming from, and how do I bridge that with whomever comes into my classroom? Because the reality is, as teachers, and I know education has become so overly politicized, our job as teachers is to be inclusive of all and to teach kids to be able to navigate difficult conversations with everybody. That's what a positive society does. And the way to do that is to first and foremost recognize self. And so that's kind of what this process. Now, it also highlights a lot of positives. One of the things that happens in this process, especially in the peer review process, is one of your class, one of the cohorts, one of the other members of the cohorts would call out, be like, you did that really, I want to steal that. I want to do that. We're teachers, right? We steal everything. I want to do that because I see that, that looks so effective. And it goes all the way back to what Adrian had presented at the very beginning about modeling behavior. I've been out of the K-12 system for a while, but I continue to coach high school football because for me, it's a way for me to stay connected with kids. And the modeling piece is absolutely true. How we as adults are presenting ourselves is a reflection of, kids see that. We look at a lot of the things that are happening in schools right now, and it's a lot, right? Kids are not doing okay. But a lot of that's because adults are not doing okay. And so this is a process for us to stop, think, and reflect and highlight the positives and try to correct some of the negatives. As far as going forward, our hope with this is, again, it's on Edthena, it's out there. You can use it, go for it. We would love to gather data on this. We want to see that, hey, does this work? Is this working at the larger scale? When you get initial studies, your end's pretty low. But when you get bigger, you have more partners with different geographies. Because again, the idea is that, we're the Northwest. Compared to other parts of the country, we are not the hotbed of diversity, right? I'm interested to see, how does this fare in California? How's this fare in the South, in Florida or Alabama? How's this fare in New York? How's this fare in Kansas? Like, we want to see how this holds up in different settings and among different groups of students. Because when we talk about equity, again, it's not about singular identities, it's about intersectionality. And that happens, wherever you go, there's going to be tremendous diversity and intersectionality of folks. We have, our group of students in the Northwest, but they're not representative of every teacher across the nation. And so we want to expand this and be able to collect data on that. Some of the things that we're still looking into to figure out, one of the great comments we got a couple years ago from an audience member was, what about the students, the K-12 students? What's the end impact? Which is an awesome question. It's also very difficult, right? Because you go through a process like this, you present at the beginning of the year, someone goes through the process, you have to isolate, is this what's causing the cultural shift in that classroom? Or are there other factors? So there's a lot of extenuating factors you have to account for in order to create a very thorough correlation. So we're kind of developing on how do we get feedback from the actual K-12 students, and so we're kind of in the process of adding that component as part of this, where they're able to say, this is how I, as a student in that classroom, how I felt at the beginning of the year, middle of the year, end of the year. That we get a sense of whether or not they are feeling, again, included into that classroom, pulled in, part of a community. And so, again, the framework's up there. Edthena is awesome because they allow you to do 2 free videos to try it out. I would encourage, if you're interested, try it out. We would love your feedback. Again, any good research is going to continue to evolve and grow. Right? This is not an absolute. This is a tool and a plethora of tools that are necessary to prepare our teachers for today's students. And so
Yes.
that's kind of the course we're going, where we want to expand this. Our hope is in 3 to 5 years to have a pretty large body of data to be able to compile and publish, in journals, to be able to kind of show, okay, this is what it looks like. Here's breakdown geography, background, and all those kind of neat little pieces. So.
Yes, so on that, if you want to get some more information and perhaps test it out, take a look at the framework, feel free to scan this QR code or go to Edthena under jumpstart.edthena.com and use the code Cortes to get some more information and test it out. And then finally, we'd like to hear from you. So if you get a chance, scan the code, and we'd like to get some feedback on what you think of our presentation. And also, it'll give you the ability to leave your contact information if you see value and interest in us following up with you and your university and your teacher preparatory program, and being able to help support you on utilizing this within your program. Well, with that, I don't want to make you late to your next session. We'll stick around here if you have any last-minute questions that you want to approach us. But thank you very much for letting us present to you.
Thank you.